Phil Harris, the fishing boat captain whose adventures off the Alaska coast were captured on the television show Deadliest Catch, has died. Harris suffered what his family described as a massive stroke on January 29th while the fishing vessel he captained was in port at St. Paul Island in Alaska.
He was on the floor of his own cabin, unable to stand, and the first thing he told his crew was to keep the camera rolling. That moment defined Deadliest Catch. But it wasn't the only time the show lost someone. Some died at sea, on camera. Others died on land, in total silence.
No one on Deadliest Catch has an easy life, but some of its cast have certainly faced more than their fair share of challenges. These are some of the saddest details surrounding the fishermen who risk it on the Bering Sea.
Why would a dying man's last order be to keep filming? And why did one of this show's youngest deaths happen to a man who was never even allowed to appear on it? Join us as we remember the Deadliest Catch cast members whose deaths shocked fans the most. The stroke no one was ready for. On a gray January morning in 2010, docked at St. Paul Island, Captain Phil Harris told his crew he felt unusually tired enough to go looking for his medication. He never made it back on deck. Engineer Steve Ward found him on the floor of his stateroom, awake but unable to move his left leg or his left hand. Phil had suffered a massive stroke, and in the chaos that followed, he gave an order nobody expected: keep the cameras rolling. The show's longtime producer, Tom Beers, later said the choice was simply Phil, refusing to let anything stop the boat. After 2 decades captaining one of the toughest boats in the Bering Sea, it was the only thing still in his control. He was airlifted to a hospital in Anchorage, where surgeons worked to relieve the swelling in his brain. Doctors placed him in an induced coma, hoping his body could fight back. For a few days, it looked like it might work. Phil opened his eyes again, spoke to the people around him, and even seemed to be improving. Then a second hemorrhage tore through what little progress he'd made. There would be no second recovery. His sons, Josh and Jake, were there when he died on February 9th, 11 days after the stroke hit. He was 53. Phil's death became the moment that changed how audiences saw Deadliest Catch. It stopped being a show about catching crab and became a show about what crab fishing actually costs. But Phil wasn't the only captain or crewman the Bering Sea, or the life after it, would eventually take. 2 more men who survived years on that water would lose their lives on dry land. How does a man outlast the deadliest job in America, only to die somewhere completely safe? They beat the sea. The land got them anyway. Justin Tennyson joined the Time Bandit in the fall of 2010, brought aboard by Captain Jonathan Hillstrand for the Red King crab season. He was a nearly 3-decade Alaska resident who'd worked the water longer than most deckhands half his age. He fished through the winter season, and by February 2011, his work was done for the year. He checked into a hotel in Homer to rest before heading home. He never checked out. When crewmates couldn't reach him by phone, they went looking and found his body in the room. 33 years old, and 29 of them spent in Alaska. Early reports pointed to alcohol and marijuana found nearby, but the autopsy told a different story. Justin's death came from complications of sleep apnea, a condition that had nothing to do with the rumors that followed him. Tony Lara stepped into a job no one envied, replacing Phil Harris as captain of the Cornelia Marie, brought on by Josh Harris, a family friend who'd fished the boat in the 90s. Tony lasted 6 episodes before stepping away, but he never left fishing behind, running his own freight business in Alaska. In August 2015, he traveled to South Dakota for the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, a yearly tradition far from any boat or any ocean. He went to sleep at a private residence and suffered a heart attack in the night. He was 50. Two men who survived years of the most dangerous job in the country, gone quietly on dry land, far from any boat. If the sea wasn't what got them, what was waiting for the next captain who thought he'd already faced the worst the job could throw at him? The captain who couldn't outrun Astoria. Blake Painter started as an engineer on the Maverick before working his way up to captain, one of the youngest men to ever hold that title on Deadliest Catch, with the kind of confidence that made for great television. But the years after he left the show told a much harder story. Back home in Astoria, Oregon, Blake's life began to unravel. In January 2018, police arrested him for driving under the influence, reckless driving, and possession of heroin. Friends who knew him worried it was only a matter of time before something worse happened. That spring, Blake went quiet. Days passed without anyone hearing from him, which alarmed the people close to him enough to go check on his house. In May 2018, they found him there, unresponsive. Police pronounced him dead at the scene. Investigators found drug paraphernalia nearby and ruled it an accidental overdose. He was 38, younger than some of the boats he'd captained. There was no sign anyone else had been involved, just a man whose battle with addiction had finally caught up with him. Blake's story followed a pattern that would repeat itself. The pressure of the job didn't always show up as a stroke or a heart attack. Sometimes it built quietly for years, long after the cameras stopped rolling, until it became something a person couldn't fight their way out of. He wouldn't be the last Deadliest Catch crew member to lose that fight. Two more men, friends within the same tight-knit fishing community, would die just 5 months apart, in eerily similar ways. What connected them, and why did it happen so close together? The same ending, twice. Mahlon Reyes spent years working some of the toughest boats on Deadliest Catch, the Seabrook, and later the Cape Caution, building a reputation as a deckhand who never backed down. In 2020, pushing through 48 brutal hours at sea, he badly injured his leg, an injury serious enough to send him home to Whitefish, Montana, to recover. He never got the chance to return to the water. On July 27, 2020, while still recovering, Mahlon suffered a sudden heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, but doctors couldn't save him. He was 38. It would take months before the full truth came out. An autopsy revealed his heart attack had been triggered by an accidental cocaine overdose, a private struggle almost no one watching the show had ever seen. 5 months later, the same community lost another one of its own. Nick McGlashan had been fishing the Bering Sea since he was 13, eventually becoming deck boss on the Summer Bay and one of the fleet's most recognizable faces. His addiction had played out partly on camera, leading him to step away from the show in 2017 for treatment. He came back sober, and for a while, it looked like he'd beaten it. In December 2020, he was found dead in a hotel room in Nashville. He was 33. The cause was an accidental overdose, a combination of methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl that took his life just as quietly as it had taken Mahlon's months earlier. Two friends, both gone to overdoses, 5 months apart. It raised a question fans didn't want to ask out loud. How many of these men were fighting battles the cameras never showed? But not every death on Deadliest Catch happened in plain sight. What happens when the danger isn't a hidden struggle, but something no camera was ever pointed at, in the middle of routine work? The pot that came out of nowhere. Todd Kochutin grew up in St. Paul, Alaska, close enough to the Bering Sea that fishing wasn't a career choice. It was the only world he'd ever known. He worked the Patricia Lee as a deckhand, and even though he only appeared in a handful of episodes, he made an impression fast. the kind of crewman other fishermen genuinely liked having around. In February 2021, while working on deck, Todd was struck by a crab pot, one of the massive steel cages that can weigh up to 800 pounds fully loaded. They're part of the daily rhythm of the job, hauled and stacked constantly in rough water, and everyone on board knows how fast they can turn dangerous. The impact left Todd with injuries too severe to survive. He died on board, with his crewmates right there beside him, unable to do anything but watch and wait for help that couldn't arrive fast enough. 30 years old, barely old enough to have spent half his life on that water, and it was already enough to kill him. Word of his death spread quickly between boats. The danger the show was named after had never needed a television camera to be real. A fellow captain who had known Todd for years before his time on the show remembered him as one of the easiest crewmen to work with, someone who felt like family the moment he stepped on deck. Todd's death proved something the show had always hinted at, but rarely confronted head-on. The ocean didn't need a storm to take someone. It could happen on a calm day, in the middle of routine work, in front of everyone. If the Bering Sea was already this dangerous before cameras ever showed up, how many of its losses never made it into any story at all? Until now. What the sea took before the show existed. Long before Deadliest Catch ever aired, the Bering Sea was already claiming lives the same brutal way it always had. According to NIOSH, the federal agency that tracks fishing fatalities, the Bering Sea crab fleet had already lost 73 fishermen in a single decade before the safety checks that followed. In 2006, the Ocean Challenger capsized near Alaska's Sanak Islands under conditions nobody fully understood at the time. 3 men died that day: Captain David Hasselquist, deckhand Walter Foster, and Steve Esparza, who was never found. Only one crew member survived, Kevin Farrell, who credited his survival suit with keeping him alive long enough to be rescued from freezing water that kills most people within minutes. None of these men ever appeared on Deadliest Catch, but their story became part of the show's early seasons. It wouldn't be the last time the fleet lost a boat no one saw coming. 11 years later, in February 2017, the Destination sank on its way home after a successful crab haul. The boat had taken on an estimated 340,000 pounds of ice, weight that should have forced the crew to stop and chip it away. Instead, they pushed on to stay on schedule. The ice won. All 6 men aboard were lost, including Captain Jeff Hathaway, who'd run boats through worse weather than this and never lost one, Kai Hammock, Derek Seibel, Larry O'Grady, Raymond Winkler, and Charles Jones, the last name added to a list no one in the fleet wanted to keep. None of their bodies were ever recovered, and it took nearly a month before a court could legally declare them dead. Federal investigators later ruled the sinking entirely preventable. The crab pots loaded onto the boat weighed more than its own safety paperwork accounted for. Rear Admiral John P. Nadeau, the Coast Guard's assistant commandant, rejected 6 of the board's recommendations: new rules on crab pot weight, ice risk, and a fleet-wide stability audit, ruling there wasn't enough evidence the changes were needed. 6 men were already gone. The rules that might have saved them stayed exactly as they were. The fleet barely had time to process it before the water took more. A year earlier, off the Oregon coast, the Eagle III capsized while crossing one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the country, a passage fishermen call the deadliest bar in America. 3 men died: Josh Paulus, Danny Matlock, and Blaine Steinmetz. Only Captain Glenn Burkhouse survived, swimming through freezing water and walking miles along the coast to find help. 2 years after the Destination went down, the same warning played out again. almost exactly the way investigators had predicted it could. On New Year's Eve, 2019, the Scandis Rose left port for a paleo season and ran into the same kind of freezing spray, building ice the crew couldn't outrun. The boat capsized in the dark, and 5 more men went down with it. 2 sinkings, 11 lives, under 3 years. And the safety checks that might have caught any of it remain exactly what they were when introduced in 1999. Voluntary, dependent entirely on a captain choosing to ask for one. Every death so far had a cause the public eventually learned. What happens when a crew decides the public doesn't get to know at all? The death no one was allowed to explain. Ross Jones joined the crew of the saga as a greenhorn during season 16, one of 3 deckhands learning the trade under Captain Jake Anderson. He appeared in just 2 episodes, but he was someone who made the hard days easier, quick with a joke, even when the crew was exhausted. Off the boat, Ross built a life with his partner, Chloe, and their young son, sharing small, ordinary moments online. A trip to the zoo, a birthday celebration, the kind of posts that made him feel like someone fans actually knew. On June 22, 2022, the Facebook group Deadliest Catch World announced that Ross had died. They offered condolences to his family and friends, but made a decision that broke from how every death before his had been handled. They would not share any details about how he died. Going forward, they explained, that information belonged only to the families who lost someone, not to the public who watched them on television. No cause of death was ever confirmed. No age was ever released. Jake Anderson posted his own tribute online, remembering Ross with warmth and humor. But even he offered no details beyond grief. For a fan base used to knowing everything, autopsy results, toxicology reports, even hotel room numbers, the silence around Ross's death felt unfamiliar. But it wasn't a mystery to solve. It was a boundary drawn by people who had already lost enough. Not every death on this show needed an explanation to be felt. 2 crewmates had died from battles fought in private. Could the same be true of the men whose families called them more than just co-workers? The right-hand man. Nick Mavar spent nearly 2 decades on the Northwestern as a deckhand and maintenance mechanic under Captain Sig Hansen, who relied on him so heavily he called him his right-hand man. Mavar appeared in almost 100 episodes, one of the longest runs in the show's history, and off-camera helped his nephew, fellow fisherman Jake Anderson, work through years of addiction and recovery. In 2020, a ruptured appendix forced Nick Mavar off the boat, and during treatment, doctors discovered a cancerous tumor. He fought through both and kept working in the industry he'd never really left. On June 13, 2024, while prepping equipment for salmon season at a boatyard in Naknek, Alaska, he suffered a heart attack while climbing a ladder. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was 59. Tom Brossard's story ran quieter, but no less close to the people who knew him. An engineer on the saga for several seasons, Tom became one of Captain Jake Anderson's closest friends off the boat, the kind of bond that outlasted his time on the show entirely. On January 27, 2024, one day after his 64th birthday, Tom died at his home in the Philippines, likely from a heart attack. Jake didn't learn the news right away. It reached him months later, delivered by Tom's wife, and viewers watched him receive that grief on camera in real time, in an episode that aired that September. Nick's death came fast, in the middle of work, the way the job always threatened to take someone. Tom's came slowly and far away, in a home neither the cameras nor the crew ever saw. Different deaths, same depth of loss. What happens when the sea takes someone before he's even had the chance to build a life outside it? He just wanted his kids to have more. Todd Meadows had been fishing with his father since he was 3 years old, and getting to work in Alaska had been a dream of his for years before he ever stepped foot on a boat there. He joined the Aleutian Lady crew under Captain Rick Shelford as the newest deckhand. In footage recorded during filming, Todd talked about how much bigger everything felt up there, how grateful he was to finally be living something he'd wanted his whole life. He also talked about his 3 young sons, saying on camera that he wanted them to chase their own dreams and never let anything slow them down. On February 25, 2026, roughly 170 miles north of Dutch Harbor, Todd went overboard into water only a degree or two above freezing. Fellow deckhand John Green III later said, Todd had actually ended up trapped inside one of the crab pots and fought his way free before going under. John said he was a fighter because he made it out of that pot. The crew pulled him from the water within 10 minutes and tried everything they could to revive him. But it wasn't enough. He was 25. The Coast Guard opened an investigation, and his death certificate listed drowning with probable hypothermia. Todd's mother asked Discovery never to air footage from the accident, and the network honored that request. When season 22 premiered months later, the show opened with a tribute instead, built from the footage of Todd talking about his dreams and his kids, the first and only time most fans would see him. A GoFundMe for his 3 sons passed $60,000 within weeks and remains active. Todd never got to watch a single episode he filmed, but everything he said on camera about wanting more for his children ended up outliving him. Knowing everything these men gave to a job this dangerous, should crab fishing crews be given stronger protections at sea, and once they return home? Phil Harris's last order was to keep the cameras rolling while he was dying. Was that his right to decide, or should the crew have turned them off? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.